My dear readers, it's with a heavy heart and a weary mind that I labor through the dense fog of the 418th episode of Jordan Peterson's podcast, which seems less a beacon of wisdom and more a lighthouse warning of the treacherous rocks of intellectual bankruptcy ahead. Dr. Peterson, your penchant for ensnaring the Enlightenment in the same net as postmodernism is a fallacy so glaring that it would make even the most amateur historian blush. The Enlightenment, with its emphasis on reason and empirical evidence, was not a misguided detour into an arid desert of rationality, as you so melodramatically assert, but a necessary escape from the dark cave of superstition and religious dogma. To claim that our orientation in the world is primarily narrative-based, and to downplay the role of reason and empiricism in favor of stories is to open the Pandora's box of subjectivity from which springs every kind of unfounded belief and conspiracy theory. Ben Shapiro, my dear, your agreement with Peterson's hypothesis that values are needed to prioritize data is a truism so banal it scarcely warrants mention. Of course, values play a role in how we interpret data. This is the very basis of scientific inquiry and philosophical debate. But to leap from this to a glorification of stories as the foundation of our understanding of the world is a leap into an abyss of anti-intellectualism. Are we to seriously entertain the idea that a narrative, no matter how compelling, holds more weight than objective reality? This is the kind of thinking that leads to the erosion of critical faculties and paves the way for the tyrants and demagogues who manipulate narratives for their own ends. Your discussion on the victim-victimizer narrative, borrowed wholesale from Marxist and postmodernist ideology, is an oversimplification of societal dynamics that borders on the absurd. To reduce the complex interplay of social forces, economic conditions, and individual agency to a simplistic binary is intellectually lazy and historically ignorant. It's a narrative that conveniently ignores the nuances and complexities of human societies in favor of a black-and-white worldview that is more suited to a child's fairy tale than serious political discourse. And let us address the elephant in the room, the religious overtones that permeate your conversation. Dr. Peterson, your flirtation with religious narratives as a solution to what ails modern society is a dangerous dalliance with irrationality. To suggest that we need a transcendent narrative, and that the biblical stories offer some sort of panacea to our societal ills, is to ignore the blood-soaked history of religious dogma and its role in some of the darkest chapters of human history. Ben, your insistence on the utility of religious narratives in providing a moral framework is equally misguided. It harkens back to a time when the Church held sway over the minds of men and women, dictating morality with an iron fist. Are we to return to these dark ages where critical thought is surrendered at the altar of religious dogma? The suggestion is not only regressive but dangerous. In your eagerness to decry the radical left and its alleged monopoly on the narrative of power, you seem blind to the power dynamics inherent in your own discourse. There's a certain irony in two well-established influential figures bemoaning the power narratives of others while failing to recognize their own role in shaping the very narratives they critique. This episode of Jordan Peterson's podcast represents nothing less than a symphony of intellectual mediocrity and historical ignorance, masquerading as profound insight. This exercise in self-indulgent pseudo-intellectual posturing, laced with overtones of religious fundamentalism and underpinned by a breathtaking disregard for empirical evidence, is not only a disservice to your audience but an affront to reasoned discourse. It's a tragic comedy, gentlemen, where the punchline is the erosion of critical thinking and the audience, sadly, is none the wiser. Your dialogue, if one might deign to call it that, is a verbose journey through a barren landscape of logical fallacies and misplaced condescension, leaving in its wake not enlightenment, but a bewildering fog of sophistry. One can only hope that future conversations will rise above this quagmire of intellectual lethargy and offer a discourse truly worthy of our time and attention.